I felt as if I were wandering around the edges of my own life, a ghost disappearing into smoke and air. My name is Martin, and yes, for a long time I seemed ready to leave, losing my footing day after day. It wasn't one big blow, but a series of long silences, sidelong glances, and promises that turned to dust. It seemed like I had become Ike and Tina Turner, entirely of my own volition, living in a marriage that was a slow, gradual fade rather than a life together. And by the time I realized I needed to leave, I was already halfway there. No, I was completely gone. I was at a family barbecue on a muggy July evening when the dam broke. The air was filled with the smell of burnt hamburgers and sunscreen, and laughter spilled across the backyard like an uninvited guest at a party. I stood at the door, a stranger in my own home, watching the party I wasn't invited to. When everyone left and all traces of them disappeared, I disappeared that night. But the story of how I ended up there, of how a man disappears from his own life, begins one night long ago. I was married to Julie for just over 8 years. At first, we were like any other couple, imperfect but bound by a strong connection. We decided to meet at a coffee shop, and the first thing I noticed was her laugh, which surprised me when she spilled her latte and apologized to the table. That was Julie, warm, clumsy, lively. We dreamed big. We didn't need a house, we needed a home, a place filled with laughter, maybe a dog. Definitely kids. It was a dream we chose, and for a while we pursued it together. At night, we would lie in bed and draw our future on the ceiling, a swing in the yard, holiday dinners with lots of chairs. But then, around the 5th year, something strange began to happen. The sketches began to fade. The lines blurred and disappeared. The crack appeared when we started trying to have children. Oh, how we wanted them. We craved them. We craved them in every word we spoke. And at first it was exciting, making plans, thinking, coming up with names. Months passed, then years, and the tests still showed no. We ran around fertility clinics, through an exhausting maze of appointments and injections, tests, and calendars. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and false hope. The chairs dug into our backs. Our hands clenched on our knees as if we could sit there and not be afraid. We followed all their instructions. Each month brought a new spark of hope, and each month ended in silent disappointment that spread through the room like smoke. I saw how it affected Julie. Her laughter, once full of song, turned to whispers. She became increasingly silent, her eyes dull and cloudy with a silvery sheen. I remember the sad look on her face when I found her wide-eyed in the children's department of a department store, stroking children's clothes with her fingertips. If she reached for something and I came over to take her hand, she would pull it away, as if I had touched her with fire. I guess at first I blamed it on stress. We were both suffering. I lay there listening to her gasp for air and believed she hated me. Sometimes I felt it was my fault, but I never told anyone. But at some point, she stopped. Not just what they were doing to me. Our shared dream was too heavy a burden, and when she threw it on the ground, I felt that she had, in a way, freed our marriage. The friendship that had existed between us withered and turned into a sterile distance. We still lived in the same house, with creaky floorboards, the same broken mugs, the same sagging bed, but everything felt empty. He was like a stranger, and the silence between us grew heavier every day, and I carried that burden alone. And the worst part? She either didn't notice or didn't care. She became cold, and the door quickly closed and locked, and I no longer had the key. I tried to reach out to her. One day I made her favorite dinner, lasagna, just like her mother used to make. As I set the table, the kitchen smelled of basil and hope. I even lit a candle. "Julie," I said, "let's talk." "Really?" She looked up from her phone, her face expressionless. "About what?" she added, and the indifference in her voice was more painful than any argument. I had been deceiving myself that love was still alive until the other person decided to end the relationship for good. Love, I reasoned, is never easy, even after the ship has sailed. But anchors can drag you down, and I was drowning. A storm broke into our fragile calm a year before everything fell apart, when Julie's older sister, Carla, returned. She had just gone through a hellish divorce. Screaming, fighting, rumors of infidelity, the police at the door. Complete chaos. She showed up with 2 children who followed her like lost puppies, their eyes reflecting their mother's tear-swollen face. Julie turned to me gently. "Can Carla stay with us for a while? Just until she gets things sorted out." Of course, I agreed. It was the right thing to do. The children, Mia and Ethan, didn't ask for their world to fall apart. They needed a safe place, and I wanted to be the person who could provide that for them. They arrived with a few bags and a plan for the night that stretched out like taffy. Days turned into weeks. The guest room was cluttered with Carla's belongings, and children's toys covered every available surface. The living room, the kitchen, and even our bedroom. Our clothes were mixed in with theirs. I bit my tongue and revised my expectations. This was a short-term arrangement. I decided she just needed a few days to get her bearings. But Carla never mentioned looking for a job or having a place of her own. And her sarcasm hung in the air like smoke, sharp and acrid. And the kids were going crazy, turning our house into a circus without a ringmaster. It felt like we were living in some random daycare center run by a drunk circus clown. And every day I came home from work with my shoulders slumped after a long day at the warehouse, longing for some peace and quiet. Instead, I found juice stains on the couch, toys scattered across the floor, and Carla's loud voice coming from the TV. "Relax, Martin," she said with a smile when I asked her to be quiet. The tension was palpable, enveloping us more and more each day. Discussions turned into arguments. I tried to talk to Julie, trying to keep my voice calm. "This isn't working," I said. "We need boundaries." True to form, she rejected my words. "She's my only sister," she shouted. "You can't make me kick her out of the house over something so trivial." Julie didn't believe I had any right to be angry. One night, Carla's attacks were particularly vicious. We were in the living room. The kids were screaming at a cartoon. "God, Martin, you're such a stickler," she said, rolling her eyes. "Relax." I looked at Julie for help. Instead, she smirked. "Oh, come on, he's so sensitive." "Ha!" They both laughed, and the sound pierced me. I was ashamed, and I didn't feel like it was my body. It got to the point where I didn't even sleep in our bed. Julie gave it to Carla and the kids, and I slept on the couch, the springs digging into my back. I was pushed out of my own home, and no one cared. And I know some people will wonder why we didn't just leave. Believe me, I asked myself that question as I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling while the house creaked around me. But it wasn't that simple. I believed that Julie didn't want to be around me because of the pain of her unfulfilled dream. The infertility treatments had destroyed her, left her empty. I remembered the woman who danced with me in our tiny apartment, who whispered promises to me under the stars. If we could just get through this, that woman would come back, I believed. So I held on too long and ended up chasing a ghost. But the burden of hope is heavy to bear alone. I tried to bridge the gap. I wrote on the refrigerator, "See you soon?" But they remained unanswered. "Let's see a therapist," I said, choking back tears. "Maybe we should talk to someone?" Julie just shrugged, staring into the distance. "We're fine," she replied, but it wasn't true. I was starting to feel that deep down. I was tired. Love couldn't keep me in a house where I had become invisible. One night, I sat in the garage, the air thick with the sharp smell of motor oil and dust. It was the last quiet place left. In my mind, I took out a notebook and wrote everything down, every hurt, every slight, every time I felt invisible. The pages filled quickly. And then I knew I had to do something. I discreetly made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. My hands were shaking as I spoke on the phone. I laid out the facts in a flat, empty voice. A few weeks later, the documents were ready, a thick folder of legal papers that seemed to weigh a ton. But I couldn't hand them over, at least not then. A fly got in my eye, and I wanted more than anything in the world for that stubborn part of me to make it look at me, to look at me the way it used to do it again. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the house was becoming increasingly tense, and I was preparing for the end. I made a mental list of things to do and marked them off with quiet determination as I completed them. I packed my belongings, clothes, documents, a photo of us on our honeymoon, into old moving boxes and labeled them vaguely, miscellaneous or storage. No one would suspect a thing. I rented a small, gloomy storage unit on the outskirts of town, paying cash, a place hidden behind a gas station where no one ever went. I started hauling the boxes there, little by little, each trip bringing me closer to freedom. I opened another bank account under a false name, bought a prepaid phone, and chose another city, smaller, quieter, with a less oppressive atmosphere. I planned everything, down to the hour of my disappearance. I was ready to vanish like a ghost if I got divorced. But I never pulled the trigger. And despite all that, the mess, the deprivation, the unadulterated laughter, it was what I loved. It was the one I loved. I love you, too. Somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the pain and exhaustion, I was still holding on to the woman I married. I'm waiting for a sign, a moment of clarity, to understand whether I should stay or go. I didn't believe we would sort things out so quickly. One Saturday, I went out to clear my head, to drive through the maze of streets and trees, oak trees. But when I turned the corner and drove into the driveway, something came crashing out toward me and forced me to stop. The neighborhood was packed with cars, and rhythmic music was coming from the backyards. The laughter, when it broke out, was sharp and strange, as if I had stumbled into someone else's life. Before I even opened the front door, I heard children shouting. I went inside and was hit by the thick smell of grilled meat and beer. The backyard was bustling with life. Children were running back and forth with juice boxes. Someone was flipping hamburgers on the grill, and the insistent hum of music could be heard over the chatter. There were glasses of drinks and a pile of paper plates on the table in the yard. It was a real family barbecue. Nothing like Jack's squad. I stood at the door, my heart pounding. It was like walking into a stranger's house at a party. I glanced at Julie, who was laughing with her parents at the table in the patio, her face and smile brighter than I had seen in months. Before I could respond, her aunt waved at me. "Martin, cut this for me, quick," she called. I nodded, smiling through gritted teeth. I had always gotten along well with the rest of the family, sometimes even better than with Julie. But then my cousin leaned over, intrigued. "Where have you been all day? We've been here for hours. Didn't you know?" And then it dawned on me. I had been excluded. I opened my mouth to respond, but Carla's voice cut me off, loud and mocking. "You know, if Martin disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice he was gone." There was a burst of laughter, and a wave of it washed over me. Julie joined in with a smile that cut even deeper. "I didn't even know you left," she said. Yes, it was a joke, but not for me. My face burned, and every laugh stung me like a needle. I raised my hot dog toast, made a clumsy attempt to smile, and replied, "Challenge accepted." The two glanced at me, but I'm sure they thought I was joking too. But I wasn't joking. And then I made up my mind. The life in which I was invisible was over. I decided that tonight I would try again. Julie was up to her elbows in soap suds at the kitchen sink. "Can we talk?" I asked, barely audibly. She didn't stop washing the dishes, she just rubbed harder. "Not now, Martin. I'm tired." The silence that followed was louder than all the shame I felt. I realized clearly that there was no affection as soon as I was able to understand anything. Long after the barbecue had gone out, dust from laughter tickled the long, unvisited rooms. If I had been the host, I wouldn't have stood idly by and let the situation get worse. I gathered the essentials in a bag, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, important documents, and a wad of cash. I quietly crept through the house, trying not to disturb anyone. Stepping outside, I placed the signed divorce papers on the kitchen table with a yellow note attached. It read, "Have you noticed yet?" The words were harsh, another plea for her to come and see me, even if I wasn't there. I stepped out into the night, the door closing quietly, like a sigh. The house was silent, though it didn't know it had lost its last support. I jumped into my car and sped away, the city lights blurring into wet streaks as I fled. That same night, I deleted myself from all social media. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Everything was gone. I had just inserted a new SIM card into my prepaid phone, but I threw the phone and the old card into a sewer grate at a gas station in a neighboring town. I didn't want to be found, not by her, not by anyone else. I couldn't go on suffering because of a life I didn't have. I rented a small cabin that a retiree was renting out through one of a dozen random classified ad sites. He took cash and asked no questions. I paid for 3 months in advance. The cabin was hidden in the woods, like a cursed place, but not far from town, where I could buy everything I needed. On my first night, I wrote on the porch of my cabin, the cool air scented with pine trees filtering through the screens, the sound of crickets chirping. I felt lighter than I had in years. The days in the cabin merge into a gentle rhythm of silence. I hear birds singing and see light, golden, slanting light filtering through the trees. I survived by doing freelance work from the internet, writing product descriptions, editing manuals, and earned just enough to pay for food, electricity, and the bare necessities. I ate much healthier, slept much better, and worked much more clearly. My beard was a mess, a symbol of the person I was becoming, unbound by expectations. I never went to see how Julie was doing because I finally realized I didn't need to. That chapter was over, and there was no point in picking at an old wound to see if it was still bleeding. I spent my evenings by the fireplace, reading old novels or writing my thoughts in a journal. I wrote about who I was and who I was becoming. The loneliness wasn't depressing. It was refreshing. 8 months passed before I realized I needed something. I had to go into my old email account to find a file I had copied several years ago. My inbox was flooded with spam, and among the junk I spotted dozens of emails from Julie. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to delete them. I wanted to bury the past, but curiosity got the better of me. The first letters were angry, her words like shards of glass. I was selfish, a coward, heartless. I had abandoned her without a word. She swore she would find me and take me to court. But as I read through months of letters, the anger subsided. She had written down warnings from the bank, missed payments, and upcoming repossessions. Now she was working 2 jobs, and her days were a blur. She wrote that I had gotten rid of Carla and the children, explaining that I was a burden she could no longer bear. "Now I understand," she wrote. "I know why you were so distant. I'm sorry I was so blind. I noticed you haven't been coming home. It's not because I did something wrong, it's because you're smiling at everyone else, because I finally understood what you gave up to try to keep all this. The one who kicked me out said, 'I'm a fool. I took you for granted. I believed you'd always be there even if I ignored you. I haven't signed the divorce papers yet, just so you know. Try coming to see me sometime. I'm too bold. I just keep hoping.' I sat there with the bright screen in the darkness, wanting to pick it up, feeling my chest tighten from the ghost of the love that had been between us. There was the Julie who laughed at my terrible jokes, who dreamed with me. Sometimes it's not feelings, no matter how strong they are, that determine the outcome. I stayed for many years, and love was my balm. Now I didn't know if I could go back to that life. I was lost for a year and reached a calm equilibrium. Every few weeks I would drive into town for groceries and never look up. Then one day I decided to go to my favorite coffee shop, tucked away on the outskirts of town. I lingered, breathing in the aroma of roasted beans and fresh pastries, waiting for my order. Suddenly, I heard my name called out sharply and loudly. I turned around and saw Ryan, an old friend who looked like he had just seen a ghost, which in fact he probably had. We exchanged tense pleasantries, and I responded evasively. "Just wanted a change of scenery," I replied, dodging his questions. He nodded, and I could see the wheels turning. 6 days later, there was a knock on my cabin door. The attendant hurried to open it, but no one entered. I peeked through the curtain and saw Julie, her face pale, her coat not warm enough for the cold. I froze for a second. Slowly, I opened the door, trying to keep a straight face. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice as hard as stone. She didn't say anything, just threw herself at me and started crying. "I'm sorry," Dana repeated, choking. "You tried to tell me. You tried, but I didn't listen. If I had known how bad things were, I wouldn't have left. I didn't know. I had no idea." "Okay," I replied quietly and let her pour out all her regret on me. When she was done, I stepped out into the cold air and looked into her sad eyes. "I'll come back. Just for one thing. To finish this properly. I'll sign whatever papers you bring. We'll divorce like civilized people. But I'll never be your husband again. Not after all this. Not after your sister's lies. Not after your silence." She didn't argue. Her fire had gone out, and she nodded slowly. "I understand," she croaked, trying to smile but unable to, and walked away from me, gradually disappearing into the darkness. It's strange how a simple action, or someone, can be such a negative concept. It seems to be one of life's most cruel lessons, and unfortunately, I had to learn it and live with it. I held on to a failed marriage for years. No one says that love can't survive when one person is striving for something, and the other has emotionally said, "I've had enough." For Julie's sake, I endured the neglect, contempt, and misery that Carla and her clan brought. I disappeared into my own home, sneaking through rooms that didn't feel like mine. But here's the strange thing. Julie only realized this after I left. Then she understood what I had been telling her all along. What we lack can sometimes serve as a reminder of what we have. Perhaps that's what some people need. The absence of what they thought would always be there. I don't hate her for it. I even feel a little sorry that she realized it too late. But I couldn't continue to sacrifice myself for this lesson. After Julie's visit, I returned for a while to finish up and finalize the divorce. We met at the lawyer's office, which smelled of ink and old wood. We signed the papers in silence, without arguments, without any last hopes. It was neat and respectful. I returned to my cabin, the road winding past the forest that seemed familiar to me. I liked the simplicity, the birds in the morning, the noise of freelance work, the ability to live without expectations. I was no longer rushing, I was living. I walked along the paths around the house, my boots crunching under the pine needles, the air burning my lungs. I sat by the stream and watched the water make its way, and believed in the person I used to be. The person who lingered, who loved too much. It was in this silence that I began to regain what I didn't know I had lost. Myself. And now, as I write, the fire crackles in the fireplace, and it is still night above my head. I am not the man I used to be, and I don't know who I will become. But for the first time in many years, I am not afraid of the unknown. One step brought me here, and I will keep going.